So we've had a couple of talks this morning about accessibility. I'm going to challenge us to put accessibility in the balance. If it really scales up in terms of the business and in terms of the legal imperatives and the commercial imperatives and even the social imperatives, where is it? So what's the likelihood of being sued for non-compliance? We've got one case in the UK, and I doubt that'll actually get to anything useful. Second thing is, and I can't comment on this because I'm not a lawyer, but if you look at the settlements in the US, I wonder how much of a settlement, and let's pretend the settlement is $10 million, I wonder how much of that money actually goes to improving accessibility and how much pays for the self-continuation of the charity and how much pays for the lawyer who successfully sued. Because typically in the US, you're paying some sort of contingency fee. If you win, a certain amount of money goes to the lawyers. In a class action, a lot of money goes to the lawyers. So if there's billions of dollars floating around and people making settlements, how come we're not actually improving things? So we need to think a little bit about that. How many of you are important in your company? In theory, you're all CIOs and heads of this and global that and whatever. So typically, you're not just thinking about one business risk. You're thinking about your staffing, you're thinking about your budgets, you're thinking about profit and loss. What other legal business issues do we deal with? Data protection. You can also go to prison for getting that wrong. What about discrimination? You probably care about when they're hiring and firing, making sure you do the right thing, as seen to do the right thing, just in case you get sued because someone's the wrong color or the wrong this or the wrong that. So you try and be doubly careful to be seen to be doing the right thing, even if it compromises some other factors in terms of hiring. And the last one, how many of you have dealt with the VAT or inland revenue? Look at the powers they have compared to the Disability Act or the Equality Act. They have the powers to seize. They can come into your house and take what they like, pretty much, if you're a director of a company. Don't mess with them. So if I was a business owner and thinking, which of these matters more to me, making sure I'm on good terms with HMCE or the disability people, perhaps from a practical perspective, I'll care about one rather than the other. So perhaps this whole accessibility stuff isn't really going to motivate people to do it. Tell me about the legal stuff, fine, yes, I agree. But there's so many things I also shouldn't do. And let me say, since I'm on camera, I have never sped, apart from the 3 cases where the police caught me. But I suspect for the rest of you, you've also never sped, and you've never crossed the road at the wrong time, etc., etc. You've never broken a law in your lives, have you? No, so there's plenty of things that we should do, but we're not actually doing. Next thing, if you're a business, someone who's responsible for running a business, you've got a bunch of choices to make with your limited time and resources and money. So let's say that you've launched a beautiful new website, this 51 degrees or whatever it is. And so you've launched this wonderful site, and you're thinking about your target customers. And you've got some target customers. And you're thinking about, what do I do next? Who do I expand my business to? Do I expand it to the people who are registered blind? What percentage of that of the market is it? 0.something%. Do I think about the people who are registered as deaf? Some infinitesimally small amount. Do I think about the people with any other type of disability? Or do I go for the US market? Now, commercially, how many CEOs are going to go to their board or their backers and say, hey, great news, I decide I'm going for the accessibility market from now on. I'm going to make sure that our product is fully accessible. Or I'm going for the US market. Can I have another $150 million? If only to buy my new yacht, because I do need a yacht at this point, because the weather's changing. Right, so is time on our side? I'm looking around the room, and I'm saying, I reckon the average age is about 40, with, of course, most of you being under 40. So the average age is probably about 25, but you're probably about 40. And some of you are a little bit grey in the hair, premature aging, perhaps. So I'm probably the oldest one here, coming on 50. So by the time we're 60 and 70, perhaps we'll solve our own problems. We're the techies. So we have this enlightened self-interest of thinking, well, screw anyone else, but I need to make sure that I can access Google or Dilbert or whatever it is that's important to me by a bank account so that I can continue living the life that I want to live. So perhaps we just need to wait 20 years and all this accessibility stuff will disappear because enough of us will be old enough that will hopefully fix the problems. With me? So there's a little call to action in the next 20 or 30 years. If you can make sure that stuff works for you, perhaps it'll also work for me when we're equally old and in the old people's home together. So changing our perspective then. I worked for Google for 4 years, and one of the things I most enjoyed working on was something called the Eyes Free Project. There's a fairly well-known research scientist at Google called T.V. Raman. He happens to be blind, and he started this project by changing the thought process of accessibility. So Android, when it first came out, didn't have any accessibility features. And they created this little open source project to say, rather than trying to fix the phones so that blind people can use them, some infinitesimally small amount of users, what about people who can't look at the phone right now? How many of you have sent a text message? How many of you drive? How many of you have been tempted to send a text message while you're driving? How many of you have done it while a police car is following you? Not a lot of you, because you've got your own smarts here, and you think, maybe not. So if I'm trying to text on this thing, I'm having to look at it and get my finger to coordinate with the buttons on the screen. And we've seen just how much fun that is on the iPhone with VoiceOver. So I can listen to my phone, but it's still hard to get the right things and delete the r. And I noticed, by the way, it didn't tell you how many r's were left or how many buzz were left. You had to guess how many to delete. So for a blind user, it's still fairly hard to know how to write the word sport or whatever. But what if I could actually use the phone without looking at it? And one of the revelations that they had was realizing you can do relative positioning in terms of navigating the user interface. So rather than saying absolute positioning, which is where I go to a fixed spot on the screen to push it, I go relative to a center point. And the center point is wherever I make the center. So I've not actually got the app installed on here, I think, but I'll show you it later on if necessary. But the idea is that wherever I put my finger is the center. It's the relative center. So for those of you who know the old-fashioned keyboards, what's the number in the middle of the old T9 keypad? 5. So what's the number above 5? 2. So if I press there, it is 5. I move up, I select 2. What if I go to the right of 5? What's the next number? 6. So the idea is you can actually navigate using radial navigation. And they created a couple of user interfaces, one to do numbers, one to do letters. And the idea was to allow people to use the phone without needing to look at it. Now, the project didn't finish. It didn't end with 1 billion users using it. But it was changing the mindset and the perceptions of what it takes to make a phone accessible. What about temporary special needs? How many of you have found that you're unable to do something, broken an arm maybe, and suddenly you can no longer use 2 hands to use your computer or your mobile phone? Or how many have had temporary blindness or temporary deafness? If only going to a rock concert might be enough for temporary deafness. So if we realize that actually all of us have periods when we might need a little bit of extra help, we may find ways to change the design and the implementation of systems so that we can use them in these temporary situations. And for men, well, actually, no, I should be careful about this, especially on camera. But one of the most difficult challenges you'll have is going to the toilet with one hand. You try pulling your trousers back up with one hand. And you'll suddenly realize there are coping strategies you need to learn. And lo and behold, about a month later, you've probably forgotten all about this. You just, thank goodness they took the pot off my hand or whatever it was. And thankfully, blissfully, you get on with life. But remember that some people actually have to live lives like this. Now, the people who live lives like this are probably the specialists. So Gary is one of my specialists. There's no point in me guessing how a person with a particular visual impairment uses technology, when I can go and ask Gary and say, Gary, how do you actually use the Android phone to check your email? And he'll show me, he'll tell me. So I get a lot more information from Gary than I get from guessing or from trying to imagine how he does it. Now, Gary may not be the expert in every occasion, and furthermore, things that work for Gary don't necessarily work for me. So one of the things I've been giving out to people, and you're welcome to one as long as I've got enough of them left, is a little key fob. This little key fob has got dots on it. The dots are Braille. So I'll give you a clue. This says Google. I happen to have a collection of these left over. You're welcome to have one. How many of you can read Braille? None of you. Gary can. But if you are actually blind today, say from diabetes, you lose your sight, or macular degeneration, it's hard for us to learn Braille. Gary, when did you learn Braille?
When I was about 4, I think I started.
So Gary learnt when he was about 4, and what you'll typically find is that Braille is in the minority in terms of experience. Do you have any stats, Gary, since I'm putting you on the spot?
I don't know, but it is in the minority because most people are going blind later in life.
Yeah, so if you're blind later in life, you tend not to be able to read Braille. So that means that stuff that's made available to people with visual impairments still may not work for you. So we may need to find another way of coping with this. And one of the reasons I work so much with mobile technology is because I personally believe that mobile technology is a potential solution to helping people live more independent lives, because it goes with us. It isn't embarrassing to have an iPhone. And the ACM had a long article. The ACM is a computer journal. And they had a long article researching how a blind student actually studied. And one of the things that she had was text-to-speech devices that would read aloud to her. But she would never use it in front of her friends because it embarrassed her to be different, to be seen to be different. She wanted to be like her sighted friends. But when she's using an iPhone, guess what? She's cool. Because an iPhone is cool. You've all got iPhones. You put your hands up earlier on. So being able to use mainstream technical devices helps us and helps the users to integrate with society rather than having something big flashing red light. Look at me, I'm different, I'm disabled. That's the wrong sort of approach, in my view.